All right, it's time for an update and forecast on the park fire. It was very active yesterday, and there are some actually pretty big changes expected today. So, what we're going to do is the same thing we always do in these videos. We're going to kind of look at what happened yesterday, try to figure out what happened in the past. Then, we're going to look at what's going on right now, where the heat is at the moment, what kind of conditions we have in terms of sky conditions, weather, and then we'll actually get into the forecast as well, because that's going to hopefully tell us kind of how this fire is going to behave throughout the day today. Now, the first thing I should say is I'm up in the mountains right now, and I rewatched my video from last night, and yeah, I think the Wi-Fi or the service up here is very bad. So the video, apologies for the poor resolution at times if it's going slowly, but it seems like the audio was all right last night, so I figure that's better than nothing. All right, so now let's just get into trying to figure out what happened yesterday. That's what it looked like yesterday morning. So we started off the day kind of already active on the northeastern side and then this head right here. But then what happened yesterday afternoon, we had strong southerly winds, and watch this northern finger right here. Just takes off. I think it grew more than 10 miles over the course of just maybe 6 to 8 hours right there. So right there you can see basically what happened on this fire yesterday. That black is where the previous burn was. So down here we're going to have Chico, Paradise, and then the northeastern side and that northern side were where we had the most heat and the most growth yesterday. And maybe that should have been the first thing I do, is just kind of get our bearings here so everyone knows kind of where the perimeter is and kind of where some of the recent heat has been. So Chico is down towards the south of this fire, and the fire actually started just northeast of Chico. It was arson, guy lit a car on fire and pushed it down into a gully, but that doesn't explain why it's grown to more than 300,000 acres over such a short period of time. That's a combination of a lot of factors. If anybody says it's just one thing, then, they might have an agenda. It's basically lack of fire history. There haven't been a lot of fires here in the last few decades, so there's abundant fuels. We've had a lot of heat this summer. We started off July with a heat wave, and that dried a lot of those fuels out. And then had above average temperatures the last few days. So then the air has been dry. That dries out the fuels even more. But I'd say the biggest factor on this fire has been the south wind. And it's just been relentless. Even during some of the overnight hours, we've been growing 40, 50,000 acres overnight because the south winds have stayed above 20 to 25 miles per hour. And that's where maybe some of the good news comes in, is yesterday was the windiest day that we're going to see on this fire, and today's forecast, we'll get into it in a moment, but it looks a lot better. So Chico's down on the southern edge. So the south winds, the reason I was explaining that is that's been pushing the fire actually away from Chico, and this whole western side or southwestern side hasn't really seen much growth, and really since this fire first took off that first night. Now, the southeastern side, we did have some heat on it yesterday. You see those little circles in there. But it sounds like they have kept it west to 32. It's maybe spotted over at a couple points, but then they dropped some retardant on that quickly. And then it sounds like they've kept it west of 32. Now, one of the big days that we were talking about is when we had it ripping up right between Forest Ranch and Cohasset. It does sound like, for the most part, they've kept it to the west of Forest Ranch. I've heard some reports that there was a few structures destroyed in there, but honestly, amazing work done to keep it out of that community. And then one thing I will say about Cohasset, right there you can see it's within the fire perimeter. But just because you're within the fire perimeter doesn't mean everything's destroyed in there. Within a perimeter, you can have low severity burning, high severity burning, some unburned islands. And I've actually heard some reports of structures that are still intact. Now, with that being said, CAL FIRE does have an update on the structures destroyed number. It is at 134. So we haven't seen that move much actually in the last 24 hours, but I'd imagine a lot of their resources right now are going towards fighting this fire, and then they'll have more crews go out to kind of assess the damage. So down to the southeast of the fire, we have Paradise and Magalia. And it does sound like we have some evacuation warnings or even orders basically around the entire fire. And I will always say, anytime you're in an evacuation order, just get out of there as quickly as possible, especially with a fire like this and conditions that we've seen over the last few days. Things can change very quickly. So once you get under an order, I would leave as soon as possible. And then if you're in a warning, or basically anywhere in California during wildfire season, it's good to just be ready to go at a moment's notice. I will say, though, things are looking a lot better for the Chico, Paradise, Magalia, and I would even go as far as to say the Forest Ranch area as well, just because of that south wind. Most of the heat yesterday, as we're able to see on this imagery right here, was going actually away from those communities and up towards the north. So that does get us up into the north, though. Where do we have to worry about up there? So you see Red Bluff over to the west, and it does look like we had some heat activity outside of the previous fire perimeter, but I believe that's just backing down right here. And I just listened to the CAL FIRE briefing as well as Zeke Lunder's update, and it sounds like they aren't too worried about this western side of the fire. Now, again, well, where we'll see continued growth today is really going to depend on the weather forecast. So definitely going to get into that. So the northeastern side, that was where we had a lot of activity yesterday. I believe their goal is still to just keep it to the west of 32. And then the largest growth was obviously towards the north here. And I am actually just interested to measure this fire at this point. So get our little ruler here, and it's now up over 40 miles, and that was almost in no time at all. It's been pretty much continuously burning about 10 to 15 miles a day, and most of that growth yesterday was towards Manton and Shingletown, but as you can see, it sounds like at 1 a.m. last night we had some moisture move in, some cooler air move in, and the fire, what they say is it laid down. And then I briefly heard in the briefing that they were able to actually start going direct around Manton, get some dozers in here. So it sounds like they're doing some good work in that area. But let's just go from the most recent heat to Manton. That's showing about 3 miles. But again, they sounded like with the conditions improving overnight, that really helped them there. And then Shingletown, that's about 6.6 miles away from where we have some of those heat detections showing up. So I would say Manton is still my biggest concern throughout the day today. And we can actually look at where we have some structures around this fire, just because so far I've just been saying names, but we can't actually show based on these orange dots what we're actually talking about. So Chico down there, but notice the yellow is going to be heat detections more than 24 hours ago, and you're actually not even really seeing any of those on the side of the fire near Chico. You do see some of those closer towards Forest Ranch and Paradise, but again, that's yellow more than 24 hours ago. The red is going to be more recent, but it does look like that south wind has just been blowing it straight up, basically parallel to 32, keeping it to the west of 32. And then on the northern edge, that's where you see the most recent growth. And then if we look in here, seems like that cluster of structures is going to be Manton. And based on this one, this might actually have some more recent data to go off of. So doing that actually shows it's about 1.3 miles away from where we see more of those structures. So yeah, northern edge of the fire, that's definitely my main concern throughout the day today. Turning on fire history, that's where not a lot of fire history towards the northeast. I would imagine we continue to see some growth in this direction, although that's definitely dependent on the weather forecast. Notice we have a burn scar up on the northern side of this fire. It looks like it's the 2012 Ponderosa. And if we look right here, you can actually see what that looks like from the satellite imagery. See that lack of fuels in there? That perfectly matches up with where we have that burn scar. So what I'm hoping is that it helps us a bit more than the 2013 deer fire did. You can see how the fire just went right through that. But, I mean, based on the satellite imagery, it does look like some of those fuels have been cleared out. So if it were to get up there, maybe it would actually slow down because we haven't seen as big of an accumulation of fuel as like some of the parts on the northeastern side of this fire. So I guess I haven't even gone over the recent numbers yet, but it is up to over 300,000 acres and 0% containment. So 300,000 acres, just to put that into context, here's the top 20 largest California wildfires of all time. It looks like the North Complex was 318,000 acres, and that's number 7. So the Park Fire is now going to be number 8 on the largest wildfires in the history of California. And it started July 24th at 3 p.m. So the fact that we've grown that much over such a short period of time that's definitely alarming. But where some of the good news comes in is that the forecast today does look better. So we'll start off, I actually want to show, we'll start off with the satellite imagery right here. And that's the best our satellite imagery has looked since this fire started. And you can see what they say about how things the fire laid down around 1 a.m. overnight. Some moisture moved in, some cooler air moved in. And that's exactly what we want to see right now, is all that smoke just settling over the fire. I mean, I've seen some fires in the past where it kicks off so much smoke one day that the next day there's so much smoke that you don't get as much daytime heating, and then it really calms the fire down throughout the day. So what I'm hoping is that our winds don't pick up enough to just blow all that smoke out of there, and it actually kind of blocks us from heating up too much this afternoon. And with cool air can't hold as much moisture, so then you end up with a higher relative humidity, and then that's good for fire behavior as well. So looking at the satellite imagery, that's good news right there. That's, I'd say, some of the best imagery that we've seen, and maybe some of the best news that we have to go off of since this fire started. Where maybe some of the bad news comes in is if we switch kind of how we're looking at this. You see some of that orange right there before the sun comes up. It's kind of hard to see it once the sun comes up because the clouds are obstructing us. But that orange down there is showing that even though we did have some cooler air, some moisture move in overnight, we do still have a lot of heat coming off of this fire. And, I mean, at first glance, those clouds don't look all that thick, so there is a good chance that the winds just can blow those out throughout the day today. But based on the fact that we still have that much heat around the fire, I would be surprised if it's one of those days where there's enough smoke that the fire completely calms down. I think it's still going to be an active day today. I just don't think it's going to be as active as the last couple of days. And part of the reason I say that is because of what happened overnight. You can see, so just looking at here, that's Manton, Shingletown up there. Looking at an actual weather station on the ground, that's probably right around the head of this fire, or at least between the fire and Manton. Minimum temperature overnight got down to 60, so that's pretty good. In previous nights, I believe the first night that this fire grew 45,000 acres, and it really kicked off, the weather station I was looking at stayed around 78 degrees overnight, relative humidity around 35%. They had wind gusts over 15 to 20 miles per hour basically all night long. So that weather station just south of Manton showed that our temperature dropped down to 60 overnight, and our relative humidity went up to, I should zoom in here, went up to 66%. So that's, I think, the best recovery that I've seen. And again, some of that moisture does find its way into the finer fuels and actually does help us out. And then look at the max gust today, 9 miles per hour. That's, again, this is an observation, not a forecast. That shows that the winds really calmed down overnight. So we had favorable conditions overnight, and that's going to help us out throughout this first half of the day. So we're at least not seeing this fire just already ripping to start the day. We're having a little pause, and with that pause, it sounds like they have been able to get some crews in here, go direct, put some dozer lines in, and take advantage of those favorable conditions. So now let's see if those favorable conditions are going to stick around and exactly what the forecast is today. That's your forecast for today, for tonight, for tomorrow, and tomorrow night. So looking at today, first thing that I notice is that, well, your temperature does go up to around 80 for this station. There's some other parts of the fire that could get up into the maybe mid 80s to low 90s, but regardless, that's about a 10-degree drop from what we've been seeing in previous days. So you'd call that a big cool down. But the main reason that that's important again is because what your cooler air does to the moisture, and our relative humidity is not going to be nearly as dry. In previous days, we were looking at 10 to 15% relative humidity. Now it looks like it'll be dropping down in the afternoon as you would expect it to, but it's just dropping around to 25%. So that's great to see right there. And then if we look at tomorrow, it does look like we start the next warm-up tomorrow, and it does look like there's going to be a warm-up next week. Maybe not as significant as the one that we had previously, and certainly not as significant as the one we had in early July. But we are starting to move in the wrong direction tomorrow. Still not as hot as we were yesterday, though. And then it is still showing relative humidity around 25%. So, great forecast for today, especially compared to previous days. Hopefully we have another good relative humidity recovery overnight tonight. And then tomorrow, although we're warmer and drier than today, it's still not as bad as we have been in previous days. And then, as I mentioned, the most important part of this fire has been the south wind. That's why you see it just rip off to the north right here yesterday afternoon. Yesterday was the windiest day that we saw all week. We had some gusts around 25 to 30 miles per hour, so that's why we saw so much growth towards the north. Wind forecast is going to be interesting this afternoon. So first thing I'll say is winds aren't going to be as strong. So that's definitely good news. From this map, it looks like it's coming a bit more from the southwest, but it actually depends on where you are on the fire. And this website right here actually does a great job of showing it. We'll just we'll keep the structures on. So I'll turn on the wind plot here. And you can see on the southern edge of this fire, see those little green lines that I'm flashing on the screen right there? That's your wind forecast. So on the southern edge of the fire, it looks like it's still mostly coming straight from the south. So that's great news for Chico, great news for Forest Ranch, great news for Paradise and Magalia. So that's going to continue to try to move the fire away from those communities. But then as we get on the northern edge of the fire, there's an interesting little, I don't know if you'd call this a microclimate, but it actually looks like the winds turn a bit more westerly up here. So, I mean, wind-wise, this might actually be a great forecast for us. Because if we have Red Bluff over to the west, even though I'm not too concerned about Red Bluff right now, that westerly wind is actually going to try to push that part of the fire back into itself. And then on this northeastern section of the fire, that's actually where the westerly flow would be a bit concerning, because that would try to push it over 32 a bit more. So I think hardest place to hold today is going to be along 32 if that wind does turn a bit more southwesterly. But then if you look up in the very northern parts of the map, so as just mapping this up here, as we get to Manton, Shingletown up here, that looks like the wind is coming almost straight west. So that even looks more westerly than what the National Weather Service is saying. So that would hopefully just take the head of this fire and push it off to where you don't have as many structures. Again, we do still have some structures, so we never want to see that. But that forecast is, I would say, good news for Manton. But one kind of disclaimer I'm going to put on that is right now, as we saw in the satellite imagery, we are still seeing a lot of heat coming off of this fire. You see that orange right there? And if you look at what it looked like, this is a view from the east yesterday. Oops. So this is, imagine a camera like right here looking at the eastern section of this fire. Watch how much vertical motion you're going to have here and this smoke plume that's generated. That's one of the largest smoke plumes that I've ever seen in my life. And the reason that's important is because when you get all that rising air, you get a lot of air rushing in to take its place. And that's where they say it can be a plume-dominated fire. So while the general wind is not going to be as strong today, and it might be from a favorable direction, if you get a big plume like this, it actually just starts creating its own weather, And then you can get all sorts of kind of gusty, erratic winds blowing faster than the forecast was saying it was going to be. So in our forecast, there's still the chance for some wind gusts around maybe 15 to 20 miles per hour this afternoon. Overall, I'd say maybe southwesterly, which would try to push the fire towards the northeast. But with that, the disclaimer is if you get one of those big plumes, then that's going to impact your local environment, and really it's a wild card what happens at that point. So I said a lot of things about the weather, so let's just summarize it here. Very cool and moist day on tap for the fire area as cooler and moist air filters across the region. Max temperatures across the fire will range in the upper 70s to lower 80s, about a 10 to 15 degree drop from the previous day. So great news there. Now let's get into moisture. Relative humidity will also be ranging from 25 to 30%, 35%, a rise of about 10 to 20% from the previous day. So cooler, more moisture, that's great news as well. Now let's get into the winds, because it's hot, dry, windy. That's always what leads to extreme fire behavior. Winds will be slightly lighter as well, so moving in the right direction. Generally out of the south, ranging from 6 to 10 miles per hour with gusts to 15 to 18 miles per hour during the afternoon. So to put that into context, when we had the red flag warning the last couple of days, we had wind gusts yesterday around 25 to 30 miles per hour. So drop in temperatures, rise in moisture, drop in winds. And then these favorable conditions are only expected to last before weather gradually trends back to a warmer and drier state on Sunday and through early next week. So I think the basic summary there is that we have the most favorable conditions that we've seen on this fire throughout the day today, and we're already seeing that in the satellite imagery, that the smoke has basically just settled down over the fire. With that being said, we do have a lot of heat coming off of it. Still some winds around 15 to 18 miles per hour. We do still have a very large amount of evacuation orders and warnings in place, so I'm still expecting there to be some pretty active fire behavior throughout the day today. It just looks the best that it's been since this fire started. So hopefully the almost 2,500 personnel that we have on this fire, just a ridiculous accumulation of resources in a very short period of time. Hopefully they're able to get some good work done today. You know, they're working as hard as they can. I heard they even woke up some crews that should have been on their off day to do a double shift just to really try to take advantage of these favorable conditions while we have them. As the conditions change, as we move forward, and as things start to get a little bit warmer and drier again, I'll have more updates for you, but hopefully this video was helpful. Hopefully the resolution was all right, and my Wi-Fi is not too bad up here in the mountains. And just thoughts and prayers go out to everybody who's been impacted by this fire. And it looks like the weather is cooperating today, so there's our silver lining if we needed it. So I hope this video was helpful. Thanks for watching.